Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're just giving everyone a minute to join us on the Zoom link, and we will get started here in about 30 seconds. Thank you all for joining us and finding your way to Youth Voice and Evaluation. And we're in session 2 of a 3-part series, and we're going to be focusing on establishing logic models and evaluation plans today. We are excited to have everyone here, expecting a few more, but also want to honor everyone's time. We have rich and robust content to get through today. So we want to make sure we use all of our time together. All right. I think we are ready to go. So welcome to part 2 of the Youth Voice and Evaluation session. We welcome you, even if you were not able to join us for part 1, that's just fine. You can roll along with us and jump into the content today. And as we end today, we're going to be inviting you to part 3 of this training, which occurs same time next week and focuses on data visualization, which we'll be really excited to spend some time and focus. But today, let's really focus on developing evaluation plans for our youth-run programs and organizations. And we're going to be continuing to talk throughout part 2 about engaging young people in this work. Josh, I'm ready for you to move me through some slides here. Awesome. So today's training is brought to you with funding from SAMHSA through the NTAC Cooperative Agreement. And we just want to disclose that the comments, content and commentary we share today are not necessarily representative of the official views nor endorsed by SAMHSA or the US government. If for any reason today we have any technology or session security issues, we will close this session and we will get you new meeting information via email. So for any reason today's session closes, please head right to your email and we will be sending you a new link to join us in a new session. I'm going to speak briefly about NTAC that's hosting our event today. So NTAC stands for the National Training and Technical Assistance Center for Child, Youth, and Family Mental Health. We are a collaborative group of partners brought together through SAMHSA funding to provide training and technical assistance to the child and youth mental health workforce across the country. Our next slide is going to show you a whole bunch of logos. What this means is there are many different organizations, collaborative partners, and subject matter experts that come together to offer this training to y'all. Youth Move National is the organization that Joshua and I work for, and we are one of the core team members bringing our experience and knowledge of youth engagement, youth peer support, and youth leadership to the work. One thing I want you all to take away of is that the center has a diverse expertise. And if you're interested in supporting your system of care or child or youth mental health efforts in an area different than Youth Voice and Evaluation, one of these partners may be able to help you, and we'd love to hear your request and be able to think creatively about how to support your community change work. On the next slide, I will share our overall goal here at NTAC, and that is that all children, youth, young adults, and families with emotional or behavioral health needs can access evidence-based treatment and recovery services in a well-coordinated system of care. And our offerings to the field are all in attempts to move forward with you to reach this goal. NTAC is established to meet a broad variety of audiences, some of which are listed on this slide. Since you all came to this training, you are definitely part of our audience. So we're here to support the efforts and the work of state and agency leadership, workforce on the ground, community partners, school partners, peer providers, youth and family partners. So thank you so much for finding us and seeing a match for the content we're offering and joining us today. And finally, I'll just remind everyone that this is just one way we engage in learning and knowledge transfer and online training like this. We also offer many other services, including product creation, individualized technical assistance, many other supports, and we invite you to take advantage of them with us today and then moving into the future. So that's a little bit about NTAC. We welcome you all into this space. I'm going to pass over to Joshua, who's going to offer some introductions of our team here at Youth Move and center us in the topics we'll be covering today.
And hello, everyone. That's me. My name is Joshua Calabrino. As you can see on screen, I go by he, him pronouns, and I am from Miami, Florida. A small bio about me on screen, and I'm was just a youth participant at a local youth move chapter, and I've kind of grown from that to that role all the way to now working at Youth Move National at the national level. And through that, I have been a peer evaluator myself. I have been a youth who was involved in youth engagement. Youth evaluation and just being a part of many projects where my voice was heard. So I like to use those experiences and channel them in spaces like the ones that we are in at the current moment. And with that, of course, we have Johanna Bergen, who I'm sure you've all met during the first session, and it was also part of the small bit of the intro that we had just now. Amazing person, wonderful. Do you want to add anything else here, Johanna?
Yeah, thanks, Joshua. I'll add that my pronouns are she, hers. I live and work in Iowa. Glad to be with you all today. And I'm really here because I was someone who didn't like evaluation and thought it was scary and meant numbers and spreadsheets. And over my work with Youth Move and with young people, I've really come to sort of claim or reclaim an interest and passion around evaluation, really in connecting the dots between what data tells us and how powerful that data can be when connected with young people who are working as change agents. So hoping to share a little inspiration and demystify stuff with you today. And lots of that learning has come with and alongside Joshua. So glad we can both be with you today.
Thank you so much for jumping in, Johanna. And yeah, I'm very glad to be here. With that, you've heard about us, and we would like to take some time to hear about you all as well. So in the chat box, if you could just share with us your names, your pronouns, where you're located, what you do, and for a little bit of an icebreaker for everyone, your AMP song. So the song that gets you excited, that gets you hyped, and gets you going when you need a pep in your step. I can go ahead and drop mine. My AMP song, at least for right now, there's a song called Tuned to a Different Station by The Dogs, and I enjoy it very much.
Awesome. We'll give everybody just a minute to find the chat box and start typing the answers to those questions. Joshua, I always love that your AMP song is different and changing. Your music library is diverse. Great. Excellent. Awesome. Welcome, Kyle and Terry and Elizabeth and many others who are typing. We will, similar to part one, later during our session, we'll do a couple of small group activities where we'll have some time to go a little bit deeper into introductions. And particularly excited that several of you are in youth leadership or youth coordinator roles, and we're anxious to learn from your experiences. Great. Hi, Nat, welcome. Awesome.
Love to see it. Thank you everyone for jumping into the chat box to share with us. Welcome, Jordan.
Great.
Hi, Sonia. More time to think. That's a good one.
Take your time and circle back when you think of something. I'm always, when people ask me music questions, I'm like pulling up my Spotify list, trying to like remember something that I've listened to. Great. Awesome. Well, let's invite folks, to continue to add in the chat box as we move forward.
Yes, we'd love to see it. Yeah, feel free to keep continuing to introduce yourselves. And with that, we're going to move on to our next slide. And we just have a question for the group here. on a 1 to 9 scale, or 1 to 9 rubber duck scale to be specific, how are things going today? You can see that there is a nice assembly of different ducks to choose from here. And if I had to pick mine, I'm really feeling like a strong 5 right now. Strong 5 is where I am at on this scale today. I'm seeing 2, 6, 3, 7, always 5. I resonate with that. 2, some 1s, love to see 1s. I'm seeing 4s. All right, yeah, we're really into the 1 to 9 rubber duck scale for sure. Anyone? Number 2. Awesome. Where are you at, Johanna?
I'm at a 3. I'm feeling pretty good coming off a long weekend, but that I'm drawn to 3 because there's that thing. That duck is gonna run into that obstacle in the middle of that pond. I'm worried about what that is.
Yeah, makes sense to me. And of course, everyone, if you feel like jumping in and sharing what your rubber duck scale looks like, you can feel free to continue. But we will continue on from here to our learning goals. And yeah, the learning goals for today, we hope to learn the process of developing logic models, explore the creation process for evaluation goals and objectives, and of course, to provide strategies for implementing program evaluation. So very important topics that we're going to be going over today. With that, we're moving into the idea of setting the stage for evaluation. As we discussed and experienced with the activity revisiting your mission goals, it is critical to a successful evaluation. So checking in and revising your mission will help you identify whether actions, activities, outcomes of your program or organization are in line with the stated mission and goals. It is also helpful to conduct a pre-evaluation checkup prior to conducting an evaluation proper. The checkups is important to ensure that your program or organization has the capacity to complete a successful evaluation. This step includes taking inventory of your program's existing assets and resources and taking note of what additional supports and resources you might need to undertake an evaluation. The checkup will also help your program identify your future evaluation goals as well. Another consideration before moving into the action phase of evaluation is to identify which stakeholders you would involve in the evaluation process. Meaningfully involving community stakeholders strengthens the evaluation process, and ideally, the stakeholders you engage should be involved in the evaluation process from the very beginning. Both identifying the purpose of the evaluation and the stakeholders you wish to engage are fundamental aspects to evaluation planning, focus, design, interpretation, and the use of results. Engaging key stakeholders can have many benefits to your overall evaluation. In general, stakeholders include people who will use evaluation results. So that will be individuals who support or maintain your approaches that you are testing, or anyone directly affected by the activities you are doing. Stakeholder engagement can help to determine and prioritize evaluation questions, facilitate the data being collected, implement evaluation activities, and of course, to ensure that results are being used in a meaningful way. And as you can see on the screen, we have those bullet points, revisiting that goal, conducting those things, right? The big thing is just to review. Just these are the bullet points to use if all the other information wasn't quite captured. With that, though, we're going to move to the next slide, and we're going to talk about evaluation planning. Before moving into action-oriented steps needed to conduct an evaluation, it's important to set up the stage to do the preparation work to ensure your evaluation is a success. An important touchstone to reflect on and revisit before developing evaluation protocol is your program's mission, vision, and goals. So identifying the purpose of your evaluation is equally as important to the evaluation itself. Evaluation helps address a number of fundamental questions, which can be, how do we know our program is a success? How is our program doing? Are we meeting the needs of our target audience or population? Is our project achieving the desired impacts and outcomes we want? What's working well? What isn't working? And once you've reflected and identified those questions that you want to ask, you are on track to develop an evaluation plan to then be implemented. Right. With that, we're going to move on to the theory of change. Okay. So what is a theory of change? It describes how your program will lead to results. Typically, it has a structure of like a problem statement, root causes, and then strategies to address those root causes. In practice, a theory of change gives the big picture, includes issues related to the environment and context that you cannot control, and shows all of the different pathways that might lead to change, even if those are not related to your program. It describes a how and a why you think change happens, and could be used to complete a sentence like, if we do X, then Y will change because. So if we do this, that will change because of, give a reason here. That's kind of the presented as a diagram with that narrative text. The diagram is flexible and doesn't have like a particular format. It could include cyclical processes, feedback loops. One box could lead to multiple other boxes. Different shapes could be used. It can look a number of different ways when you're developing a theory of change, when you kind of formulate it and put it onto paper. A theory of change, this tool is used for program design and evaluation. And I believe, Johanna, that we have a video to go inside with this.
I'm just putting that in the chat box. So we actually sent the video to everyone who participated in part one. We left you with a little bit of homework, which was to watch a short video about theory of change. We don't have time to watch it today during today's session just because of how much content we have, but I'm putting that link in the chat box here in just a moment in case you didn't watch that before this session or are just joining us for part two. We'd recommend it as it's 4 minutes and it's a quick and easy way to get grounded in the concepts of theory of change.
Awesome. So yeah, if you get the chance or if you haven't, please feel free to jump into that video. We'll give some further context into this theory that we are discussing right now. With that being said, to continue on with this idea of theory of change, this is what it looks like when we're referring to those boxes. And when you dial it out and see, this is what it looks like. If A, if B, then C, or if A, then, if B, then C, right? And it can look a number of different ways. This is a very, very simple one, but like we said, it can be expanded and have these loops and things like that as well. So that video will be really, really good to watch to get a better idea on this theory of change. With that being said, we have a little bit more of our content here, which is what is a logic model? Johanna.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joshua. So for those of you that are already familiar with logic models, you might know that there are a variety of approaches or frameworks or strategies when building a logic model. We start with introducing the concept of theory of change because it's the foundation to how we approach logic models here at Youth Move National. We also think that this will be relevant to many of you, particularly if you're working in a system of care community. There's been an investment in some of the materials around system of care, like the primer toolkits and some of the prior technical assistance that would focus grantees in developing theory of change logic models. So for those of you working in a grantee environment or maybe a community that had a prior grant, you may be familiar with or even have tools like a theory of change and a logic model available to you. We've done some prior work and there's videos and recordings on YouTube where we've done training specifically for young people just on creating logic models. We're going to do a fast version of that today, but if you're interested in more detail, we have a short one-pager reviewing the process, the why and the how, and then some other training materials. But so as Joshua introduced theory of change, the sort of if this then that, and eventually we get to our vision or our end state. The logic model is a tool or a framework within that larger theory of change umbrella. And we're going to talk specifically about how logic models can be used to frame our evaluation. So the logic model, this is a definition from W.K. Kellogg, who has some really great community change logic model resources online that you can access. This is their definition. A logic model is a graphic depiction or a picture of how your program works. So the logic model shows the graphic depiction of the relationship between who and what your program is and the activities and the work that you do in the world. The logic model outlines the theory and the assumptions underlining the program and your activities. Logic models provide a roadmap for your program. They highlight how we expect a program to work and the activities that we need to do and sort of the order we need to do activities in order to achieve that desired outcome or end state that we're driving for. We can describe our program or our work engaging young people or offering youth peer support programming or offering youth leadership and advocacy strategies. We can describe the components of our program and our intended outcomes within a logic model. And we're going to continue to talk about why it's so important to write these things down. So what might a logic model look like? Our next slide shows an example of a logic model that we use here at Youth Move National. So as an organization, you might have an organization-wide logic model, but we found that actually it's very helpful to develop logic models that are specific to certain programs or areas of our work. So this is a logic model it was created in 2018, and it was created to give us a roadmap for our work related to youth peer support. So we identified that our youth peer support work was distinct and different from the other areas of our program. It was also an area we were investing a lot of resources and time in. And we wanted to make sure that we had a roadmap and our whole team knew where we were going in relation to our youth peer programming. So to develop this logic model, we brought together our youth advisors. This was a time when we could have in-person meetings, which was very fun. And we did a lot of flip chart paper to develop and identify the components of our logic model. And then we went back home and staff worked on organizing all of the inputs from young people into this logic model. You might hear us say this a couple of times. Logic models oftentimes need to be revisited. So when we're doing effective evaluation, we might find out that some of our programs or strategies aren't working. Perhaps we made faulty assumptions in our logic model creation. And so at Youth Move, we are actually actively working to update this logic model because 3 years later, we've actually added strategies to our library that are affecting our long-term outcomes and what the change we want to see in the youth peer field. So logic models should not just stay on a PowerPoint slide or stuck in a binder on your shelf, but can be something that we look at and refer to regularly. So today we're going to share a couple of different logic models. They can look very different. People like to sort of style their logic models to make it look like they're programming and connect their branding. You can get as fancy as you want. This one was made in a PowerPoint slide. So pretty basic, anybody should be able to replicate it. And you'll see there are some different language choices that you can use to categorize your logic model. But this is an example of one that we use here at Youth Move. Okay, so in case you're not bought in yet, I'm going to share a few more reasons about why making a logic model for your program is a good idea. So logic models help us take really big, broad goals, like I want to have every young person in my county have access to youth peer supports, and gets us to write down the detail of the steps we're going to need to take in order to meet that broad goal. So it helps if you've got a team of youth leaders who are very creative and always sort of blowing up big vision pictures. Logic models can get us to write down all of those details to get to our end results. Logic models, creating a logic model is this perfect place to identify when we have gaps or when we are making assumptions. So say my goal is to develop youth peer programming so every young person in my county can access youth peer support. I am making the assumption that every young person in my county wants youth peer support, right? And so the steps of creating a logic model will raise these questions and cause us to challenge our assumptions, which is a really good thing to do when you're in programming or in planning phases or early implementation phases of a plan. Logic models build understanding and promote consensus. Speaking from experience, that logic model we just showed you, probably 20 people in the room contributing to that logic model, we did not all agree on what we were building when we walked into that room together. And so the process of committing to a final logic model caused us to have to create consensus around where we were going. And we decided as a group to set some ideas aside to let another organization do that work, or to say, maybe later, maybe we'll pick this idea up in 4 or 5 years, but it doesn't fit in our programming right now. And then now that we have the logic model, this is a model that we share both internally and externally. So when we meet a new organizational partner at YouthMove and they want to contribute to our youth peer support strategy, we can share our logic model as a way to explain, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going, and this is why we're going in that direction. If you want to get on this train and work with us to go in this direction as well, here, join us, right? But it's a way for us to be transparent about the work that we're doing with our partners and potential partners. Similarly, logic models can build buy-in. I am a really big fan of the Strengthsfinder Assessment that challenges us all to realize that we have different unique strengths. And sometimes we need to lean into someone who has different strengths in order to bring change into fruition. And I think that I have found with my team of very big thinkers that logic models have allowed us to see the detail and therefore get everyone bought in on the direction that we're going. So if you're a team of big thinkers, logic models can help you get those details down on paper to provide direction. We've talked about this a little bit, but the creation process of logic models oftentimes expose assumptions and beliefs that we need to challenge or think about how to adequately respond and incorporate. And then finally, why we're talking about them today is our logic model can help us clarify what to evaluate. So I'm not sure if any of you all have had this problem, right? But say we're going to plan a children's mental health awareness event. It's going to be for the whole community. Our goals are really to bust stigma around mental health. We're going to have young people sharing their stories. We're going to have a wellness fair because we care about the 8 dimensions of wellness. And we're going to have a 5K and we're going to raise some money for our youth programming. And we're going to advertise what youth peer support is doing. I don't know, some of y'all have been in a planning meeting where your children's mental health awareness event gets really big and exciting fast. And then someone asks, how are we going to know if it's successful? What do we want to evaluate about our event to see if we have raised awareness about mental health or challenged some of the stigma that exists or increased knowledge of youth peer support? And all of a sudden, our friends who like evaluation have identified 28 questions that they would like to answer through some form of community surveying, polling, evaluation, and data collection at the event. And at some point we have to say, I don't think we can get all the data for these 28 questions in this event, or all we're going to be doing is evaluation and we'll skip the fun and the point of the event. So when this happens, our team will go back to our logic model and look for guidance about our long-term outcomes. What really have we prioritized in our program development to evaluate and collect data on? And we can usually get ourselves down to 2 or 3 key measures that we really care about that show that are mission aligned and show how the events and strategies we're employing are moving us towards our long-term vision. So logic models can be super valuable when we're trying to pare down our evaluation questions. Okay, that's my logic model sales pitch. We're going to talk a little bit more about nuts and bolts of what goes into a logic model, but I'll pass to you, Josh, to cover a couple of slides.
Awesome. So yeah, so just to continue on with the idea of the elements of a logic model, what all goes into a logic model more specifically. There are, like we mentioned, a variety of templates that you could draw from, but most logic models include the following 5 components that you can see on your screen. So you have your resources and your inputs, the activities and the outputs that come from those activities. Then you have your outcomes and your overall impact. And if you take a look at that little sentence on the bottom there, right, components 1, 2, and 3 make up your planned work, while 4 and 5 make up your intended work. So this is, generally speaking, what a logic model is composed of. If you remember back to a few slides ago and we showed Youth with Nationals model, I had a similar build to this one. It doesn't have to look like this, but this is, again, generally speaking, what they can look like. With that added bonus, we're going to take a dive into what those elements mean, right? Your inputs, your resources are the necessary costs for implementing a program. So things like time, money, the staff that you have to pay, volunteers, offices, or any meeting space and equipment on top of all of that are the things that you need to have around to support community building and the creation of community building, creation of program or implementation of programs and things that you're going to be doing. And then of course you have your outputs, as you can see the parentheses there, actions, and are the actions of the group that are seen as instrumental to producing change. So these actions are typically targeted toward one particular audience or population. Outputs include a really wide variety of activities that are critical to producing the outcomes that your program hopes to achieve. Outputs can include things like social media campaigns, recreation programs, workshops, seminars, trainings, or just any other community learning opportunity. And they also include any direct services that are provided by your program. And then you have outcomes, the results, and those are the changes that are produced by your program effort. Outcomes are synonymous with results. They're kind of one and the same there. And it's important to note that there are varying levels of outcomes, and that includes the initial or short-term outcomes, the intermediate, right, that mid-range outcome, and then the very long-term outcomes as well. So your initial outcomes are benefits that a program produces. Initial outcomes have been characterized as the learning that occurs within the target population that we are working with. This learning could include actual knowledge gain, expanded awareness about an issue, new skills that are being gained, or changes in opinion throughout the community. Intermediate outcomes are characterized as behavior changes that are produced as a result of the initial outcomes, or because the learning that previously occurred. An example could be a policy change as a result of increased awareness and knowledge of a specific issue or population. And lastly, there are the long-term outcomes, and these tend to be characterized by changes in the social, economic, or environmental conditions that are brought about by changed behaviors, policies, or social actions. And those are changes that can be at an organizational, community, or system outcome. And a question for the group here, if you want to drop it into the chat box, can you think of an example of a long-term outcome? Feel free to drop that into the chat box when you can think of one. I see in the chat box, is a policy change considered a long-term outcome? A policy change, in terms of the definition that we're working with, seems more like it's like an intermediate outcome. A policy change typically would come after increased awareness and things like that happen. So typically the policy change happens after an initial outcome occurs. That building of awareness and things like that can then result in an intermediate change or a policy change. You're very welcome. Yeah. And I see a good example of a more long-term outcome being reduced in school suspension and a higher graduation rate, right? So increase in change in that school life, that environments, things like that in your community, that would be sort of a more long-term outcome. Those higher graduation rates and reduced suspensions, yes, would be a good example of a long-term outcome. Seeing a few more: decreased population and hospitalization for transition age youth or young people. That's a good one. Johanna sharing that youth have access to mental health supports that are community-based, culturally responsive, and equitable. Awesome stuff there. Yeah. These ones that we're sharing now are great examples of long-term outcomes that you can get. And you can see how they build upon one another, right? So the initial outcome, the short-term, would affect the target population in the group, which would then lead to a change in policy. That policy then gets noted, and then the entire community around that policy change then shifts to cause those long-term outcomes. So they all affect one another in large and small ways. So keep that in mind when you're planning these things and you're thinking about your logic model and you're working within your communities, that they build upon one another in that way. And with that, I would like to pass it back off to Johanna.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. If you move us forward one slide, there's another visual representation that folks have found really helpful that goes through what Josh just covered, right? So these are the components of the logic model. And this particular graphic is from the logic model development guide that's referenced on the slide. I just dropped the link to the guide in the chat box, as this is one of maybe sort of 2 or 3 resources that we go to continually when we're creating logic models here at Youth Move. And we also are sharing this to share the slight difference in language that you might see. So don't get tripped up when you're developing logic models. 2 of you are going to show up and you're going to call your things just a little bit different words, right? So that's okay, right? So resources and inputs, resources or inputs, you'll see organizations selecting one or both. Some folks want to use strategies over activities, etc. But again, this is sort of broken up into your initial planning, right? What are the resources that we have available to contribute to our programming? And what are the activities that we are proposing to implement in order to create or reach our long-term impact? All of that's in our plan phase, as Josh said. And then we move in, our logic model moves into documenting the results, the things that are going to happen. So first we have outputs, we make things, we have programs, we document, we tell stories, we meet with young people, we do peer training. Outputs are the stuff that we do and produce every day in order to show those outcomes, which we are likely going to evaluate in order to reach our long-term impact. So this might just be different language that lands to help provide clarity about the logic model steps for you. This slide, if you're like me and you like to take a photo while you're in a training to hang with you, this might be a slide to take a photo of because it would be a good resource in an activity we're going to do in a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about identifying or about developing your logic model. So if you leave today's training and want to go back and create a logic model for your program, what the heck are you going to be doing? So to develop a logic model, the first step is to create a clear program description. And this needs to be clear enough for community and partners to understand who you are. And it needs to be clear enough so our evaluation efforts can be mapped onto it, right? So an example, we're working on this at Youth Move right now. It's really important in our program description that we are youth driven, right? That young people are making decisions that guide what and how we do our work. And we want to clearly state that in our program description because we want to evaluate if we're effectively meeting that part of our programming, right? So first, you want a clear program description. And then you want to identify the information you're going to need in your logic model. So this, for me, oftentimes is big flip chart paper, right? We're going to list all of the activities we are doing, that we plan to do, that we're dreaming about maybe doing, right? These are the blocks, the Lego blocks that might be inserted into our logic model. And then we need to ask ourselves, is there a logical sequence or order or flow to activities or outcomes, right? Do certain things need to happen first in order to allow other activities to happen later? If you already exist as a program, so you're not developing something new, but rather you're creating a product, like maybe you've been in operation for 2 or 3 years and you're just now building a logic model, totally fine. There are a lot of people with you about that. Or maybe you're sitting in this training and you're like, we already have a logic model, right? And so your question might be, is it up to date, right? So what we want to do is to read your logic model from left to right, and determine if the sequencing is flowing, right? Or if there are holes or gaps, or if you leaped from providing, so this happened to a lot of us, right? We leaped from providing weekly youth peer support groups on Thursday nights where we were doing art projects to, we are in a global pandemic and we are no longer meeting in person on Thursday nights. How are we going to reach 100 young people in our community? We had made an assumption that programming could maintain in person as we've traditionally been doing it. So if I was reading my logic model, you know, in March of 2020, I might be noting, ooh, we need to build in new strategies to meet with young people virtually every week and do something different than, you know, art projects until we can figure out how to sort of mail people the things that they need to do art projects. And then also, if you have a logic model, ask yourself the questions, what actually are we doing? Are there things on the activity list that remained in the dreamland but have never actualized? And are we seeing the behavior changes or the results of the programming that we wanted to when we wrote this out? So sort of like a health checkup on our logic model to ask ourselves these questions. If you're planning a brand new program, so it doesn't exist yet, you're in the dreaming stage, then you might want to start on the right side of your logic model and read to your left, right? So you're sort of doing it backwards. And in that way, you're asking yourself, what is the change we want to see in the world, right? Ultimately, if we do everything we want to do and we get to close our program down because we were so successful, what would the world look like? We answer that first question, which is the impact question, and then ask ourselves, okay, if that's our impact, what are the outcomes we're going to have to achieve in order to have made that happen? What are the strategies that we would have put into place in order to reach those outcomes? What were the resources we needed in order to implement those strategies? And you build your logic model essentially backwards, if that makes sense. Both directions are appropriate and fine, right? You want to pick the directionality of facilitating, creating your logic model based on where you are in the life cycle of an organization. And as continuing to use Youth Move as an example, we can create a new logic model with that backwards flow every time we sort of launch a new program, right? Because it's new, we're sort of starting with white paper or blank paper and building from there. If any of that didn't make sense, you should drop a question in the chat or raise your hand with the little emoji, because we could spend a few more minutes there before we move on. It'll make our future activities better. And if that is sort of making sense and examples would be helpful, we have a couple of what's the word? We made examples anonymous. So these are real life logic models that youth programs made. We've sort of de-identified, that's the word I'm looking for. We've de-identified them so we could break them down for you. And Josh, maybe you can walk us through that first one.
Yeah, and as you can see on screen here, right? So there was a challenge that was set in place, right? There was limited peer-to-peer, limited healthy peer relationships, and limited healthy family relationships. So a number of goals were set to help address that, right? Providing statewide opportunities for youth peer-to-peer and young adults becoming able to advocate. Promotion of self-advocacy, and the strategies that were then developed to go ahead and do that would be to create opportunities for statewide youth connections, to work with statewide family organizations to offer more youth-focused activities, and then develop a training program for youth to become peer workers and enhance those self-advocacy skills, right? So the outputs are kind of coming into play right at this point. And then, of course, you have the needs, connecting with other youth serving organizations that are out of the system of care catchment area, offers support and technical assistance to family organizations to enhance programs in order to meet the needs of both family and young adults. And of course, lastly, we have the collaborate with adult mental health services to modify current peer curriculum certification to meet the needs of young adults of transition age. And then we have that question of the bottom there is, how do we measure our success and progress over time? Now, if you have taken the steps in place to do the pre-evaluation and put an evaluation thing in place and things like that, there should already be a system created to measure what all of that would look like. So in a case like this one, you could potentially, as an example, they could have potentially said, well, if opportunities are increasing for our statewide youth connection, and we're actually then meeting the goal of providing statewide opportunities for youth peer-to-peer to occur, then that would be a marked increase. And that's what they're going for. That's what they decided on during that pre-evaluation. All the stakeholders were involved in that discussion, that is how we measure that. Easily measurable goal right there. There's more peer-to-peer happening. If there's an increase in that, boom, got it. Keeps it very simple in that aspect. So they are recognizing the challenge, creating a goal for it, and then developing strategies to hit the needs and what we are looking at here. And go ahead, Johanna.
Josh, yeah, I'll add one thing. So we share this example because it's simple, right? It's pretty straightforward. In terms of the logic models we'll look at, this one has less categories, less words. It can be easier to hold on to, right? And it's a good example of how the language can be different. So in this logic model, the long-term impact that this program was going towards is, they just called them their goals, right? Very accessible language, easily understood. And so it's a good example of that sort of like logic models will look very unique based on the program or organization. We also share this logic model for the exact reason Joshua is just offering about evaluation. So this was a logic model that was created by a Youth Move chapter that was in a federally funded system of care grant site. And the youth movers were asked to set the goals and identify the strategies the grant should use to meet their youth engagement requirement, right? And so this was one of several logic models. There were family advocates developing a logic model around family engagement. There were clinical partners thinking about increasing access to promising and evidence-based practices. There were several sort of pocketed logic models that were all then brought to the evaluation team, and the evaluation focus and questions drew from the needs that were identified here, just as Joshua articulated. So I think it's a really good example of like a youth program that's nested in sort of a wider, more community collaboration change initiative. And I suspect that many of you are doing youth programming within a larger ecosystem. So this might be a good logic model to map on as an example. That makes sense, Josh? Okay. We have one more de-identified example to share with you. Yes. Okay. See, you can make them more complicated. So this is a logic model that has sort of all, I use air quotes, all of the components, right? So a mission and vision statement here, their values are led, the top red arrow is the values of the program. And then this starts, it's often common for a logic model to identify the audience. Who are we really focusing on serving? And that can be helpful if you're a youth program in a community that has a lot of youth programs, right? What makes what you're offering different than others? Identifying your audience can do some of that. So this is a youth program. It was also connected to a system of care grant effort at one point. Their long-term impact or their vision is to develop a statewide youth advocacy organization. So this was a community, a state that had sort of a localized youth advocacy happening, sort of pockets of youth meeting, but they were central to like their local geo community, and they really wanted a network across the state. And so this is a logic model that was developed for this program. So they're focusing on children and youth under the age of 21 who are experiencing emotional or mental health challenges and involved in 2 or more youth serving systems. So mental health, child welfare, juvenile justice, education, and early childhood. So they're really keen into sort of multi-system involved young people and wanting to connect those youth across the state. The challenges were identified by young people about the lack of services, limited supports. You see here again, young people wanting access to peer support, and then this lack of like civic engagement or being involved in community. And so then they set a series of goals, and Joshua was talking about these earlier as sort of those medium, intermediate outcomes, right? Not how the world is going to be different. The world is going to be different when we have a statewide advocacy organization. But in the meantime, we're going to do all of these activities around outreach and social marketing. We're going to do some self-advocacy training. And then here are the strategies that they're going to implement. Now, I wasn't in the room when this particular logic model was created, but I would guess that there was 30 or 40 strategies brainstormed. And the logic model forced a prioritization to end up with these primary 6 strategies that this program is going to work on. And then the bottom arrow, which you'll also often see in logic models, is your commitment to continuous quality improvement and evaluation. We talked about both of those things in part 1. We're going to set our evaluation plans to be responsive to the strategies we're implementing in order to measure if our goals are being obtained and if we're moving towards accomplishing our vision. Generally, a logic model sort of general recommendation is to fit it on one piece of paper. That's great for sharing and referencing and using it in the world, but it's also really helpful because it makes you prioritize things and pick the things that are truly important. It also often means that the evaluation questions and evaluation strategies are going to be page 2. Right? They're going to be sort of the next step you create after your logic model. All right. Let's pause for just a minute. Does anyone have questions about anything we've covered so far? While you all are thinking of questions, Josh, I'm going to propose a quick change. Can we introduce the case study and then we'll go on break? So when we come back, we're ready to jump into the activity. Okay, perfect. All right, you are welcome to use the emoji raise hand feature or chat box or come off mute and ask us questions. If it's more comfortable to just send a side chat to Joshua or I, we are welcome to take your questions that way as well. All right, so we are going to get some practice in today about creating a logic model. Because we are such a diverse group and you all are joining us from many different states and communities and tribes and territories across the country, we are going to introduce you to a generic case study and ask everyone to be creative. And today I would like to invite you all to move to Anytown, USA. So Josh, can you bring us to the other slide? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and review this case study. Then we're going to take a break, which you all have deserved and is much needed. And we'll come back and talk about how we work through helping this youth program in Anytown, USA. Our hope is that in this case study, we hit on something that feels familiar to you. This probably doesn't feel all familiar to you, but we're hoping there's maybe one or two little details that you can see yourself in and can bring your perspectives and experiences to help out our new youth coordinator. So in Anytown, USA, there's a newly hired youth coordinator named Jane. Jane is responsible for creating youth programming for the coming year. These youth programs need to support youth who are currently receiving mental health services from any clinic. Note there that our audience is starting to be described, right? So young people who are currently receiving services at any clinic via the COOL grant. Okay, particular specific audience, we'll probably talk about that later. The goals of this COOL grant and of any clinic are to decrease mental health stigma, increase the number of youth receiving services, develop youth peer-to-peer spaces, and to help youth graduate from high school. So we've got 4 or 5 goals from our funder here. The Any Clinic has a small youth advisory board with 5 active youth members. So that's our situation. Jane is newly hired. The task in front of Jane is to design a year of youth programming. We have some grant goals that somehow likely need to be identified and connected to the youth programming. We've got a youth advisory board, a small but mighty youth advisory board to support the efforts. And we know that this funding and this youth programming needs to support young people who are receiving services at Any Clinic paid for by the COOL grant. So we thought it might be helpful to know a little bit more about Anytown because we know that grants and mental health services aren't offered in a vacuum, right? The environment around matters. So here's some things that we've learned about Anytown. There are currently no youth peer support spaces in the community. So this need has been identified, but there's nothing currently being offered. The community has identified there are limited resources LGBTQ, and you can assume that this data has come from people within the community. Anytown has documented the need for mental health resources for youth. However, despite the need being identified, young people receiving services are quite low. There are limited school counselors available in education setting in Anytown. There is a very active parent-teacher association that supports education. And Anytown hosts a large community arts festival annually. It's sort of what they're known for, their big event. So we would like to invite you to think a little bit about Anytown, pretend that you live there for a little while. And when we come back from break, we're going to dig into what Jane might do as they move forward to develop a logic model this program. That break. We have planned 15 minutes, so if we come back at 10 for that hour, wherever you, for me, that means I'm coming. If you're at the East Coast, you're coming back. And if you're at Pacific time, coming back at, you're welcome to stay on Zoom, turn your camera off if you want, otherwise log in time at 10 after. Josh, I might need to lean in on you if my audio is not coming through right now.
You sound good right now.
I do. Thank you, Joanne. Yeah. My internet hasn't been very strong today. All right. Hello, everyone. We'll just give everyone a minute or two to come back before we start talking about Anytown, USA and returning to connecting logic models to evaluation. I hope everyone actually stood up and walked around during the break. I refreshed my coffee cup to maintain energy while we hang out today. Awesome. Okay, great. So we are going to jump back into content and we're going to do a couple of activities together this afternoon. So what we would like to do is invite everyone into a slightly smaller group for this activity. So we'll use the Zoom breakout function and we are going to help Jane start to develop a logic model for the youth program that she's responsible for starting this year. And so what we want everyone to do is to take a moment, just ask any questions, field any questions or thoughts you're having about Anytown USA to get started. And then we want you to work together to start documenting the initial draft of the logic model. No perfect final logic model required at all. This is a brainstorming activity. And we're going to ask everyone in your small group to identify some resources that are going to need to go into youth programming, a goal that you might hold for Jane and the youth programs, a brainstorm of a couple, 2-3 activities or strategies that might be good to put into the programming, and an outcome. What do we want to have accomplished? We're only going to have sort of 10 or 15 minutes together, so we won't be able to answer all of these questions, but we want to just get started and think about how it feels to try to answer these questions. So two things are going to happen. We're going to break into just a couple of small groups, and we're going to ask you to do one piece of technology ninja work. I have a blank logic model. Actually, Josh, I'm going to grab screen sharing from you real quick to show what everyone's going to get. Okay, can you all see a blank logic model?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so this is a Google Doc template. Okay, I'm dropping a link to that into the chat box. So this is editable by anyone who hops in. You can go ahead and just start typing. The quick ninja technology trick we need to do is that we would love to have a different version of this in each of your breakout rooms. So once you get into your breakout room, if one of you would be willing to just go to File and make a copy, and then you will then, and if you hit OK, you'll be in your own new version of the logic model and not typing and fighting the logic model of another group who's brainstorming in the room next door. Josh and I are going to join breakout rooms as well, so we will be able to help make sure that your group has a blank model here. And then if you think you might want this as a resource, feel free to just make a copy for yourself right now that you might want to use in your own youth programming. We want to focus on filling in some of these categories for our Anytown case study, and then we'll get back together and do another level of lift together. Does anyone have questions about that before we move into new rooms? Okay. Joanne, if you'd be willing to break us up into smaller sections, that would be awesome. Great. Hello and welcome back from small groups. Let's double check. I don't want us to get, yeah, I think we're all back. Excellent. Okay. Thank you for engaging in some discussion with about Anytown and in support of Jane Doe and the mission they need to undertake to develop youth programming in the coming year. We have just a few minutes to share, to popcorn back and forth about what came up in your small groups. So Josh, I think we have a couple of discussion questions if you're willing to pull slides up. But we are So first question is just, would someone be willing to share one or two things that came up that you put on your logic model? And then we'll talk a little bit about how the experience of doing this felt. And the group that I was in came up with some really good things, so I know somebody has something to share. What's an example of strategies or activities that you identified to put in this logic model?
I'm pulling it up. So strategies. We said, I like this one a lot, the offering youth peer programs after school in the school building.
Yeah. I loved how our group got to that too, Deanna, right? Like, so if our goals are to increase graduation rates, increase youth peer support, increase access to mental health services, let's do it in partnership with the schools. What might that partnership look like? And that populated activities. So creating youth peer support, having those groups be run in the school after the school day. Does another group have a different example of a strategy or an activity you came up with?
I'm not a new strategy, but a resource for the current strategy as identified. We might be able to tap into some of the budget and the people from the strong PTA there. So that was an observation based on that strategy.
Oh, I love that, Nicole. Great. Yeah, so I hope others identified that parent-teacher association and put it in the resource category. A resource in many ways, I actually was thinking about them as a messaging resource. Like if they're very active and maybe well received or perceived in the community, could they message the importance of mental health for young people? But Nicole, you're right. Like probably have budget for activities. If it's anything like the parent organization in my own school district, already focused and spending dollars to support social, emotional, and mental health. That's great. Cool. Okay. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
One of our resources that we also put, I was in Nicole's group as well, we put the Community Art Festival to help us with the goal of decreasing the mental health stigma. And so we use that to kind of increase the amount of people knowing about different things that about mental health, and then that would satisfy that goal.
Excellent. So you're seeing hopefully, some flow between, as you're completing the sections of the logic model, those facilitation sessions guide you through this roadmap, right? And resources, spur strategies, connect to the outcomes you're trying to identify. That's awesome. Okay. Jack, can you move us forward one slide? And we just wanted to create space, not to talk so much about any town specifically, but more about this process of thinking how to create a logic model. And we're curious about what parts of this activity feel hard or challenging, and what feels comfortable, or what parts of this felt easy.
Having the technology and the right access to the tools you need to create logic models is a key component.
If anyone else tried to copy the document and then realized nobody else could see it, we were with you. Thank you for powering through technology. But yeah, right? So if I know if I have everything I tangibly need to create a logic model, then I can start. But if technology or not having the right people in the room or one thing that we are often working with communities is we want our logic model to be co-created with young people, having youth identify what are the community needs and what are those outcomes. But if we're starting from scratch and we haven't invited youth yet, like we are at a chicken or egg question. So working through like maybe our first resources are focus groups, right? To bring young people in and start the invitation process of planning. All right. Okay, I'm doing a little bit of a time check, and I think that we should move forward with a little bit of content. Thank you all for playing along with our activity. Our goal is really for folks to feel confident, to leave training sessions and feel like you could sit down and start putting pen to paper around something that might look like the first draft of a logic model. So thank you for practicing with us. All right, am I up next? Yes, okay. Josh, can you move us forward a couple of slides? I'm gonna talk about the limitations of logic models. Excited.
Johanna,
Oh, can you not hear me?
you're coming through a little patchy right now.
Darn it all. Would you be, let's do this. I'm gonna turn my camera. Is that any better? Otherwise, would you be able to slide, Josh?
I think just for right now, for to get things copacetic, yeah, I'll take this slide over and maybe we can have you shuffle in. So yeah, to talk about the limitations of a logic model, as you can see on the screen, right, logic models only represent reality. Represent being the key word there. Logic model focuses on the expected outcomes, and logic model do not test cause and effect. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about a logic model, right? The representation of the reality might not be the actual reality. There might be unexpected outcomes that could come up, and there are things that you cannot test in cause and effect that will not happen when you're using a logic model. Though logic models rather are helpful tools to support planning and evaluation activities, they do have some limitations, some of the ones that I mentioned. They only represent reality. It's not the actual reality. And although they are displayed in a linear fashion, the relationships between input, outputs, and outcomes are complex, interactive, and they rarely follow a linear sequential order that you will find within the logic model itself. And similarly, logic models only explore those expected outcomes. So there's a chance that your program might expect something will get something unexpected. So you will need to pay attention to those unintended or unexpected outcomes that can be positive, negative, and even neutral. And again, they don't represent that cause and effect when in fact they are not intended to test cause and effect of your program components. Keep in mind that other factors may attribute to the observed outcomes. Outcomes cannot always be attributed to the items that are listed within a logic model. So as you're making a logic model and they're amazing and they're wonderful tools, but there are things that limit its abilities and what all it can do. So just keep that in mind as you're going through this process. With that, Johanna, I'm not sure where you're at on connection, if you're doing better, but would you like to take the next slide over for me to continue?
I want to try. Can you hear now? Or still very choppy?
It's a little choppy.
Okay. It looks like I had another bar of internet, so I was hoping, but still no.
It's still not fantastic. Don't worry. You can continue to get yourself settled, and I will continue on here. So really quick, right? So you have your logic model, everything's good to go, you're set up. Now let's evaluate. And to get started, what you're going to need to do is these things on the screen right now. Your first step before implementing an evaluation is to establish your priorities by determining what aspects of your program need to be evaluated and who will use your results. Before deciding on evaluation methods, questions, or even anything else, it's important to focus your evaluation by establishing a goal for the evaluation. And there are some common goals that can be used. That can just be simply testing program effectiveness, making a case for changing program practices, justifying continued funding, and documenting change efforts. So these are really important things to keep in mind when you're creating this. Is it just a simple effective testing? Do you just want to document the changes that are happening? Like, what are you doing this for? And that overall goal will then be the facilitator to guide the rest of your questions where you're going to need them to reach that goal. All right. Want to try again?
All right, Josh, I think I'm back.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, all right, thank y'all. Cool, so thanks for getting us started on about thinking about our evaluation plans. We want to really think about planning and focusing our evaluation. So we talked about this, or mentioned this a little bit earlier, that really there are an infinite number of variables that we might be interested in evaluating, but we really want to make sure that we're creating an evaluation plan that we can carry out, right? So we have a program at Youth Move that we're creating the evaluation plan for right now. And I think in the first draft, we were going to develop something like 20 new survey tools because we were so curious. We kept coming up with more things that we were curious about being able to answer. And then someone very smart was like, I don't think we have the staff time to develop and implement 20 new evaluation tools, which was very accurate. And so we were able to scale back. So if we could move forward one slide, Josh, we want to plan and focus your evaluation. So we think about setting goals for your evaluation and think about goals for evaluating individual level, so outcomes or impacts that young people that are coming to programming or receiving peer support might experience, organizational level goals. So you may have, thinking back about Jane Doe in Anytown, I think there are probably goals for establishing organizational infrastructure to provide youth programming that we might want to evaluate. And then our goals for the community or systems level, right? So most of you are coming up with long-term impacts that we're really talking about community change affecting many young people over several years. So thinking about setting evaluation goals at individual, organizational, and then community level. As we establish goals, we want to think about process evaluation as well as outcome evaluation. So process evaluation is asking ourselves questions like, did the program run the activities and the outputs as intended? Like, did the plan we put in place actually work? And this helps us, process evaluation helps us to determine what we would do differently next time. So if we were creating a mental health stigma busting campaign at the annual Community Arts Festival, we want to ask ourselves some process evaluation questions that could help us do a PDSA, a Plan, Do, Study, Act process. Folks that were with us last week know all about that, with our process evaluation results in order to do something better, bigger and deeper at the next year's art festival. And then ultimately the aim of a process evaluation is to improve the services as we move forward. So thinking about those as contributing to our quality improvement. And on the other hand, we want to look at outcome evaluation. This answers the question, did the program work? Is it effective, right? So outcome evaluation attempts to prove as much as possible that the program's efforts resulted in positive and beneficial changes. So thinking about, did young people feel more supported, feel more positive, have beneficial outcomes of attending weekly youth peer support meetings, for example. We care about process and outcome evaluation. They're critical together. They give us an overall picture of what we're offering. It might be that an outcome evaluation fell short, like our data collected showed that we weren't hitting our goals, but the information within the process evaluation holds the sort of key for what we need to change to improve outcomes in the future. And at this point, we really want to be writing down a plan for documenting how we're going to collect data. Probably the thing that happens to me most often at work is we get about 60% through a training and someone says, do we have the post-training evaluation ready? And I say, yes. but I really wish we had done a pre-test so we could show change or growth. And I always have these ideas after we've started, right? And so, well, you don't want to be me, right? And instead we want to think about when are the points of time to collect data and to write that into our plan. And then we want to, when we're writing our data and evaluation plans, we want to plan for the end, right? What are we going to do once we have evaluation results? How are we going to share our lessons learned? What are we going to do because we have that data? More on that in part 3 of this training. So moving quickly through a little bit of content here, an important part in establishing our evaluation plans is to develop our indicators. And so if you can move us forward a slide, Josh. Indicators are the specific things that we identify that we want to examine in order to answer our evaluation questions. The indicators you select should answer your evaluation questions and help determine whether or not your program goals and objectives have been achieved. And we recommend that both the evaluation questions and the indicators are identified alongside young people that are working with you to design your programs. I find that youth members within youth programs are sometimes the most curious and have the most insightful curiosity about the evaluation questions we create. Indicators should be written out in a way that they're actionable. Our recommendation is to use Smarty Goals. So if you're not familiar with this acronym, 100% recommend digging into it a little bit. I'm going to drop in the chat a link to a worksheet that can just walk you through documenting these. I'll do that in a second. Apparently I copied it somewhere else. But Smarty Goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound, and then the new IE that have been added to this are inclusive and equitable. And so every time we identify an indicator, we want to write it out as a SMART goal. All right. And then we want to double check our indicators and make sure, really challenge to make sure that we haven't made any sort of faulty assumptions when we're developing the indicators. So we want to make sure that they will provide useful information that we can measure, both at the process and outcomes level. We want to make sure that they're feasible. So it might not be feasible to get 100% participation in pre and post training evaluations from every young person who comes to a Zoom event you host in a year. Based on experience, 100% is challenging, right? So let's make sure that we're setting indicators that are feasible and that are going to give us the data we capture. One of the most frustrating things is to ask young people to participate in interviews and surveys and data collection and get to the end of the project and realize that we asked for all of this data, but we're missing something critical. Say we're Jane Doe in any town and we forgot to measure or document in some way initial rates of graduation, and we're halfway through our grant and realizing we're not collecting the right data to show movement on that goal. So this evaluation questions, goals, moving into indicators are all things that we write into our evaluation plan. But probably the more fun thing to talk about is then figuring out how might we collect this data, or what might our evaluation methodology be. And Josh, I'll pass over to you to talk about that a little bit.
Sorry, technology got weird for like a whole second. Sorry about that. Okay, we're all seeing choosing your evaluation methodology. Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, when developing your evaluation design and data collection process, there are several considerations that you're going to need to think about. It's especially important to be culturally sensitive and consider how different groups prefer to share information. Similarly, when collecting data with diverse participants, it's important to be thoughtful of language barriers and how to address them. Very simple one that I run into in Miami, for example, is a lot of people who come to Miami, who live in Miami, who are participants in a lot of programs, their primary language is Spanish. And many of them are bilingual, right? They can speak English well enough, but they're more comfortable in Spanish. So it can be important to have translators there, to have people, translators and interpreters. So translators to change the documents from English to Spanish, and interpreters for the words being spoken. Those things are important to have in place. And you'll also have to be mindful of the number of participants involved, the program timeline and type of program, and finally of ethics. Make sure to review your ethics. In research and evaluation, there are 5 ethical principles, and that would be first, do no harm, voluntary participation, informed consent, and then parental and guardian consent for those who are under the age of 16. And then confidentiality and anonymity are some of the ethics that are important to keep in mind. And that keeps everyone safe, keeps programs safe. Everybody will be much better when the ethics are followed. So yes, these are things to keep in mind. They do matter very much as well. And then moving on to the actual evaluation methods, there are a number of them, and each of these methods has its strengths and limitations. When you evaluate, you must consider which method of evaluation will be best suited to get the information you will need while addressing the unique needs of the population you will be working with. And in some cases, you might do several different types of evaluations. Questionnaires, for example, are simple, effective tools for collecting information from a large number of people. Questionnaires are also relatively inexpensive to administer. They're able to evaluate both process and outcomes depending on the questions you ask. Questionnaires can contain either forced choice or open-ended questions. Forced choice questions have a limited number of responses from which a respondent may choose. And one advantage of these types of questions is that they are typically easier to analyze. And open-ended questions solicits qualitative feedback where respondents are free to answer as they choose. And open-ended questions can provide more in-depth information, but then in turn are now more difficult to read and understand and put into categories. So again, these are the benefits and the drawbacks you can get from each one. Focus groups are group interviews that guide participants through facilitated discussions on a clearly defined topic. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this evaluation method and have likely utilized it a bunch of times within your own community. And make sure that before you conduct the focus group, you clarify expectations, you select a diverse set of participants, and you support participants in attending with things such as reminders and, if possible, incentives. And just as another quick thing, also try and set it at a time that youth are able to go to. If you're including youth as that's a big one. I've had a lot of focus groups where they'll set it for like 11:30 a.m. on like a Tuesday. It's like, this is not a great time for youth at all. So it's something to keep in mind there. And key informant interviews are useful in accessing firsthand knowledge of program effort. A key informant can often provide their own assessment of what is happening, and a key informant can be a grant project director, community leaders, your agency staff, youth, family members, or even the funders as well. And then, of course, you have the next one there, observation. And what it does is that it attempts to document behavior through just watching and listening. You can use observations to gather information about a program's processes or even the results that it produces. However, be mindful that the observer may impact the behavior of those being observed. If you conduct an observation, be sure to adequately train observers to take note of the setting, the participants, activities and interactions, and then the frequency and duration. I know I can recall firsthand very vividly of having those observers walk into a classroom and it was like, who is this random stranger? So it can definitely have effects on your participants or whoever might be within your organization. And then, of course, you have pre and post tests. They're a really easy way to assess changes, whether there's knowledge gain or even just a change in attitude. You create just a standardized set of questions and administer them at an agreed upon entry point and then exit point. For example, before training begins and once a training has been completed, I'm sure many of us are familiar with that. You can then compare responses from the pre-test to the post-test, and then that makes very easy to note easily measurable changes from there. So yes, a few evaluation methods that we can use. With that, I would like to turn it over to Johanna.
Great, thank you. So just moving forward with some practical tips for collecting data, and Josh started to share some of tips from his own experience collecting Evaluation Miami, so thanks for doing that, Josh. So we always want to think about providing context when we're asking for information from young people. I actually think this is a key practice in all youth engagement efforts, but also definitely for evaluation. So let's explain why we're asking questions or asking for a survey or holding focus groups, and then also explaining the reasons and where the information that's shared will be going. So what are we going to do because young people are sharing information and insight with us through our evaluation process? We want to make sure that we're not making assumptions. So we want to challenge ourselves for assumptions both while we're developing the evaluation tools and then also while we're collecting data. So many assumptions we could take, but I think an assumption that I definitely have caught myself in is I might be collecting data through a survey or through an interview or through a focus group, and young people might be very quiet or answering questions with sort of short pieces of information. And I make the assumption that they're not interested or maybe not even willing to participate. And then however, 3 or 4 questions later, I ask the question and all of a sudden fountains of information are coming out. And I catch myself in realizing that my assumption could have steered the experience in a very different way if I sort of gave up hope of getting insight, right? But instead needing to be tenacious and responding to the needs of young people and asking them how best to support their comfort and interest and to support transparency and information sharing. We want to be mindful of our own beliefs, values, cultural norms, and gaps in knowledge. This can come out in so many different ways, but assumptions that everyone in the room understands language or talks in the mental health system language or values contributing to evaluation, those are not necessarily true for everyone sitting around the table. I definitely, through my work at Youth Move, realize how important it is to participate in evaluation. And I've sort of grown a value of responding to questions. But that is not a value that I've always held, and definitely not a value of everyone that we might be asking for data collection from. When we're collecting data, we want to think about how to be neutral in our position and understanding that the way that we approach questions or the process can influence how a young person might respond. We communicate in lots of ways, not just with our words or the words that are written on paper, but also with our body language and our hand gestures and the way we show up in a room. So we want to be mindful and perceptive of how we're engaging in young people. We want to be aware of nonverbal reactions, both when we're asking young people questions to notice when they might be uncomfortable or experience tension or frustration in the process, but also that our nonverbal reactions to something a young person might be sharing can cause an effect. And so being neutral in our in receiving any of the information that's being shared by a young person. I think this is important. Many of us, I think, participate in data collection for things that we're really passionate about. So I know that our team oftentimes gets to interview youth coordinators around the effectiveness of their work, and we care so much about the answers. And yet, if our role is data collection, we need to play that neutral role in that process and let our passion shine in our analysis steps. And then we want to be really conscious of confidentiality. Josh talked through a couple of important steps about this, but what I want to share here is that we want to be really transparent and honest with young people about what information they're sharing will remain confidential and what type of information cannot remain confidential. And I find that young people are very curious about if their information is going to be shared as individual data points or sort of as an aggregate across a whole group of young people. So we want to be very clear and upfront about the confidentiality we can and cannot maintain. A few more practical tips. Josh, what are some ways that we can, what are programs we can use to collect data?
And there are a number of great programs you can use. Some are on screen right now. Some aren't on screen right now that you can also use. Just many different free programs that you can use and utilize. A really great one that I've used personally a lot is Surveymonkey. Surveymonkey can be a really strong tool for a number of things, depending on the kinds of questions that you're asking and the information that you're receiving. Surveymonkey can actually pour through or go through rather and pull the analytics and kind of gather up your responses in certain little sectors. You can have it be anonymous, not anonymous. It's very customizable. You simply have to just make a Surveymonkey account, and there's a certain level of logic and things like that are into it, but it's a fairly intuitive system to jump in. And there's also Google Forms. I've taken a number of evaluations that were just simply log into this Google link. You hit the link, it takes you right to Google. It's a very big platform. Everyone's familiar with Google. And you can fill out forms right there, and it gets sent through the Google files, and whatever organization you work with, it can just piece it all together from right there. There are things like Poll Everywhere, Typeform, and Survey Gizmo. All of them have their own benefits and drawbacks, but they can all be used. And of course, there's Mentee Meter. That typically is like live responses that you should get back. So you pose a question, everyone can go in and anonymously type up their responses. It pops up on a screen. It's good for when you're streaming live, or if you're in a large group and you kind of want to show all the participants feedback all at the same time. It's a great way for everyone to see each little rectangle or bubble or whatever language you want to use for it of each response back. So these are just a few free tools that your program can utilize. It's not limited to these. You can create your own. Things like that can also be used. So keep that in mind. And you can even use some of these as a template for something you would be creating as well. So including but not limited to what you see on screen here.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. And while you were talking, it reminded me of an invitation that we want to offer, and we'll offer again at the end of our training today. If you're interested in going deeper in an example of a data collection plan, or how to use any of these tools, or wanting more individualized support around a logic model, we would love and welcome individual technical assistance requests. And we have information about how you can ask for that support later as well. Okay, and for those of you that joined part one, we use Mentee Meter as an example of how to incorporate a brief amount of data collection just into a Zoom meeting that you might have with a group of stakeholders. So we want to practice a little bit more. And so what we're going to do is just have a very short breakout room again. And what we are going to ask everyone is to go back to that logic model where we were drafting strategies and activities, and pick just one activity that was drafted. So I know you maybe had 4 or 6 or 8 activities. Pick just one activity from the logic model, and we're going to practice throwing an evaluation plan at it. So we want to select an indicator to measure this activity, and then pick an evaluation tool. So a survey or a test, a post-test or a focus group or an interview, some sort of tool to measure this indicator, and start to draft at least one question that you would use in that tool. So maybe you're envisioning a focus group with 12 questions, just write one of them because you only have a few minutes, and decide how the tool will be used. So who might use the tool, when might you use the tool in the year of youth programming that you're leading. And then we'll come back together and share an example of how this might feel. So Joanne is gonna mush us back into our breakout rooms here in just a moment. And we have, we'll come back at 15 after the hour. So just 8 minutes or so to start working on this. If it helps you to write them down, you could use the same Google Doc you were using before. And we'll find out what we all found when we reconvene in the main room.
I hope that the time was good for everyone during their breakout groups. With that, we're going to have a little bit of a small report out based off of the discussion that was generated in those groups. So if you can just please share out a brief summary of the draft logic model that your group has worked on. And then just with that, just what was difficult about this activity and what felt comfortable in this activity. So just anyone who feels the gumption who wants to volunteer, please.
Josh, I'm realizing just one edit to this slide. We did share out about logic models, but so for this time, share out about the evaluation indicator and tool you selected. And the group that I was in had a great plan, so maybe one of them would be willing to share.
Okay, I will. So we decided on a satisfaction survey for the peer groups that would be after school. And I'm not sure about difficult, but definitely having the logic model makes it easier because you have it just really succinctly in front of you. You can compare your outcomes and your activities, and you're trying to understand what am I actually evaluating. Like I said, I think it's just like very helpful to have it written out as a simple bullet point in front of you.
Thanks, Deanna. Yeah, totally. And that was said in the group, like we were trying to decide what to do and someone said, well, our outcome is this, so let's ask this question, which is really great.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, awesome work there. Any other brave volunteers?
I can share a little bit more about the where Deanna's group went. So the satisfaction tool survey was the tool that was selected, and then actually this group identified several questions that could be added to a satisfaction survey. Questions like rate how comfortable you are in the space. Was the programming offered at a time that was good for you? Would you refer a friend to this program? Has your culture, identity, religious beliefs been validated, affirmed, and respected in this space? And then we were talking about how to use the survey, the satisfaction survey, and the proposal is to connect it to the semester because it's programming offered at school. So just like your school year has a calendar, leaning into that calendar and offering the satisfaction survey at the end of each semester. And we had a conversation about how important it would be for this data to be collected in a way that was anonymous. So an easy way for youth to respond, but then we only want to look at the answers in the aggregate and not at individual identified responses. So I thought that was a really good discussion in all of 7.5 minutes. We would encourage more than 7.5 minutes to develop your evaluation plans for your youth programming.
Awesome work there. And I feel like in an example like that one, the obvious choice for a tool are typically tools that make sense. Like if you're going to do an entire school, it'd be really difficult to, to do an entire school in like a focus group, or a number of, you'd spend months and months and months in individual focus groups of 6 people to get that entire school. So sometimes the survey is just like the straight option, or I'm sure there are many other ways that you could do it as well. So I liked how kind of the overall idea, the line of logic is there with this strategic logic model. With that, if there are any other individuals who'd like to share theirs, you certainly have the floor. All right. If not, then I will hand it over to Johanna.
Awesome. Thanks, Joshua. So again, thank you for participation in the small groups and contributing ideas and thoughts in that quick manner. I am going to move us forward into thinking about part 3 of this training. So Joshua and I are here today to answer any questions about content we covered today. You're welcome to put them in the chat and we'll respond to everyone. Otherwise, go ahead and send either one of us a direct chat if you have a more specific individual request for us to respond to. If you move us forward, Josh, we have information about session 3. So next week, we're going to be joined by a new presenter, Steph. Steph is our partner from Michigan Public Health Institute, and that session is going to be all about telling stories with your data. So taking you through sort of the life cycle of data collection. And so part 3 is, okay, we collected data, now what? And this session follows some of the core values we hold about data collection, which is give the data back to the people. So if we asked information from young people, how do we return that data to young people? And then how do we co-create advocacy strategies to make change happen because we now have data? And so this is also going to cover data visualization. It is going to be super practical, very hands-on. So if you have ever wondered how to turn a scary Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of raw data numbers into something that is worthy of printing in the newspaper, sending to your legislators, posting on Facebook, creating infographics, that's exactly what Steph is going to talk and walk us through next week. So definitely encourage you to come back for that session. Same time, same space. If you're not yet registered for that series, link is in these slides, and we would love to see you next week. Before we wrap up today, we would like to ask for some feedback from you. And so we have an evaluation form for today's session that has just been dropped in the chat box. Thank you so much for coming. One of the reasons we're able to offer so many free trainings and continue to create products and resources is because people who attend trainings fill out surveys and tell us that the work we do matters. We also have a robust quality improvement process here at the NTAC Center, and all of the partners are continuing to revise and improve the offerings based on feedback that you all give us. So major props from all of us for completing the survey in the chat box right now. And then our final message today is to offer an invitation for you all to continue to engage with us. So you somehow found us. We hope that you're signed up for the NTAC listserv, where you can identify the topics that you want to be emailed about to engage with us in future trainings. We're also on all of the places that have social media icons on this screen. And we are available for individual consultation for training or technical assistance. And that's the request TA link that has the big green arrow. You are welcome to just say, I need help making a data dashboard for my system of care grant, or I need help recruiting a new youth coordinator, and we will match you to a TA provider that can help you. Or you could say, I'd love to have support from Josh at Youth Move to share more about what was working in Miami and how I might have young people collect data in my community. So you can ask a broad or a specific request, and we'd love to support you. And one of the ways we get to know you is in training sessions like this. So we hope to see you in future trainings. The calendar for the coming months is being created right now, and we can't wait to share space around youth engagement, youth leadership, and youth peer support topics with you in the future. And with that, I think we are done for today and looking forward to engaging with you all in this session in part 3. So thank you all. Yeah, thanks back to you. Thanks for joining, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.